An Honorable Profession is brought to you by OpenCounter.com. OpenCounter builds tools for local governments to deliver permits and licenses online. Their portals make complex permitting simple, which lowers transaction costs, increases transparency, and empowers economic development. OpenCounter is a vital tool for communities big and small across the nation, including Atlanta, Charlotte, Oakland, Indianapolis, and San Diego. Check out OpenCounter.com to see what they can do for your community. If you like An Honorable Profession, I encourage you to check out another great podcast that's out to give you hope in an often hopeless world. Dastardly Cleverness in the Service of Good. Each episode, my friend Spencer Critchley talks to people who are making tremendous positive impacts on our world. The conversations are funny, engaging, and hopeful. Listen to Dastardly Cleverness on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm your host, Ryan Coonerty. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that identifies rising stars in the Democratic Party at the state and local level. I've been fortunate enough to be a New Dealer for years, first when I was mayor of Santa Cruz, and now as chair of the Santa Cruz County Board of Supervisors. We've been doing this podcast for a year now, and I encourage you to check out some of our previous episodes with great leaders like Mayor Pete, Nevada Attorney General Aaron Ford, and candidate for U.S. Senate in Texas, Amanda Edwards. You can find us at newdealleaders.org or wherever podcasts are found. And if you like what you hear, please tell your friends. We're trying to bring sanity to politics in an insane era. We need all the help we can get. While presidential candidates trudge through the snow, I thought it'd be fun to talk to a New Hampshire elected official who's responsible for getting that snow shoveled, and so much more. Vice Chair of the Select Board for Exeter, New Hampshire, Molly Cowan. Molly spent years working for other elected officials before she threw her hat into the ring and ran herself. We talk about that transition, what's going on in New Hampshire and how it might impact presidential politics, and how she balances her personal life as a mother of two boys with her career and public service. Enjoy our conversation. Molly Cowan, Vice Chair of the Exeter Select Board from New Hampshire, welcome to An Honorable Profession. It's so fun to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here.
So while I'm tempted to go straight into your past and your service, I want to do what every American is thinking about right now, which is to tap you for your knowledge of what you know about the New Hampshire primaries, your experience having grown up in New Hampshire and then seeing them today. What can you tell us for all of us who are wondering what's going to happen?
I mean, I think it's bananas. It's I joke that it is my most favorite season. Every 4 years we get this huge honor. And I understand there are some sort of diversity problems and questions, but I also think that there's a really good tradition of New Hampshire voters asking candidates really tough questions and sort of putting them through the vetting process in a real way that is really authentic and you can sort of only get in a smallish state. And we are diverse in some areas. And I think it's been a really interesting place. There have been people who've been campaigning for what feels like decades. Looking at John Delaney, who has had me on his Christmas card list for a number of years, which is very, very thoughtful, but, sort of not the way to get my vote, maybe. And so the access that we have as New Hampshire primary voters, and particularly as elected officials in New Hampshire, is really interesting. I have friends who get calls from candidates. If they've not committed or endorsed yet, they get their weekly call from Elizabeth Warren, who calls them up and asks them about their kids. And
can I just say, let me testify this, because I went to New Hampshire in 2000 to campaign for Al Gore, and I was out there walking through the snow, walking neighborhoods for him, and I didn't know the answer to one of the questions, and the person at the door said, have the vice president call me. And that was the expectation, was that the vice president was going to call and answer that question, because they weren't going to take it from some kid at the door. And the level of seriousness of which some, not all, New Hampshireites take this as
Granite Staters.
There
you go.
Take this is incredible. But how have you seen it change over your lifetime, or has it changed, or is it still the same?
So that's a really good question. I think it's changed in a number of ways because we used to, before social media, before this sort of candidates were really looking to have a viral moment, which triggers a lot of things, press and fundraising and all of that stuff. It was really these authentic interactions because you didn't have social media, you didn't have people. There were always trackers. There are always trackers, but it's different because everybody has a camera, a personal camera, a personal, way to record people. And so I think it's changed certainly over my lifetime. I'm approaching middle age. But I remember, going to candidate events when I was 8 and 9 when it was the Clinton Bush race. And even before that, when Clinton was in the primary with my dad, who took me. And, just being stunned and awed that there were these people who were so thoughtful and could answer questions sort of at the drop of a hat. And I think that skill for candidates was really honed in states like New Hampshire and Iowa, where you have to, you don't have the opportunity to sort of pressure test or focus group your answer. You have to, be authentic and answer it. And I think it's changed a lot. Because voters are still interested in seeing candidates, but a lot of the times it's in these big, huge venues where there's just this lack of authentic connection. And I think some candidates are doing it really well still. Elizabeth Warren takes selfies with literally every single person who wants to take one with her. Cory Booker does this. He has a very famous selfie pose. And so I think that has, social media, the rise of social media, has really changed what the New Hampshire primary looks like.
I got to say, retail politics is important, but taking a selfie is very different from answering a in-depth question in somebody's living room.
Yeah.
And so is there anyone sort of doing the old style knocking and talking?
So we had a special election. It was a state rep. I don't know if you know how much you know about New Hampshire House. We have 400 members. It's lunacy. I love them, but my goodness. And so a lot of the candidates, not all of the candidates, really took an on-the-ground approach to making sure to elect and work to elect local candidates. And I think that that was a really good investment. So there is certainly still retail politics of candidates going door to door, but the thing that I don't see, especially with the front runners, is there's no way that you're getting Joe Biden alone in your living room. Same with Pete Buttigieg or any of the front runners. Although I did see Pete Buttigieg eat a chocolate cayenne spiced cookie.
On purpose or by accident?
It was on purpose. It was offered to him by a New Hampshire voter. And I remember thinking, boy, I wonder how many of these things these guys have to do and have to go through. I think that there is still that retail politics that's there. But I also think it's changed through the lens of social media and this desire to have a public viral moment.
And we now have candidates. We have several neighboring state candidates running. Does that make a difference to be from Massachusetts or be from Vermont? Is that going to move the needle, or is it really
that's a good question. I think it helps in terms of name recognition. Certainly that I saw that a lot in the 2016 primary with Bernie Sanders. People had really. People had known him. And the thing, I know I'm talking a lot about Elizabeth Warren. I'm not endorsing. But she made it a point to come and help with a lot of these races that were really tough in 2016. She wasn't on the ballot in 2016, and she came and campaigned for Maggie Hassan multiple times. She came and campaigned for Molly Kelly when Molly Kelly was running for governor in 2018. And so I think that she builds a lot of goodwill. And I think candidates really can build a lot of goodwill. But, that's not universal. There was just that poll. I question the sample size of the poll that just came out with Pete Buttigieg in the lead at 25%. The sample size was like 250 people.
Wow.
and I think the majority of them had advanced degrees. So, probably not telling of the electorate.
Right.
But, I think that there is maybe an initial advantage. There's also an advantage to having been elected, like with Joe Biden. He has a lot of friends. Truly, and maybe you know this, how many times has he run for president? And so, there's still those connections and friends that he's made from before.
Wow. Are you planning to just stay neutral through this whole thing?
So I also represent Emily's list, and so who knows what's going to happen? So I'm personally not endorsing. I would be happy with almost any of them. Truly, I think that there is a huge, a plethora of wonderful, qualified, intelligent, smart people running to be president. And one of the best lines that I've heard about this is they're sort of, they're all on the same team. They're just sort of jockeying for who's going to be the captain. And that's something that's really telling. I was looking at, sort of who's taken the unity pledge, because I think that that's really interesting, because we know we have a monumental Herculean effort in order to win this upcoming presidential election. And the people that I know who are running for president and the people who are working for the people who are running for president know that they're ultimately going to all be on the same team. And so there's inter-campaign relationships that I've seen happen on the ground. And there are people who are, sort of happily in, sharing time at town Democratic Party committee meetings. And I think that that's really nice to see, because I don't think that we saw that after the 2016 primary, and I think it really hurt us. And so we have this real effort and real fight ahead. And so they're jockeying for who's going to be the team captain, and because we are all on the same team. That's
good to hear, because the media has an interest in playing up the divisions and the punches not thrown, et cetera, et cetera. But if at the end of the day everyone's recognizing the ultimate goal of all this is to save the country from a truly terrible president, then I think it's that's good to hear. If you haven't figured it out already, Molly is a New Deal leader. It's fitting because An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that identifies rising stars in the Democratic Party at the state and local level. I've been fortunate enough to be a New Dealer for years, first when I was mayor of Santa Cruz, and now on the Santa Cruz County Board of Supervisors. Since we launched this podcast, I've spoken to some amazing leaders. Leaders like Montgomery, Alabama Mayor Stephen Reed. He's the first African-American to be elected to that position in the city's history. Please listen to his story and tell your friends about An Honorable Profession, and rate us on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen. Now, back to my conversation with Molly. Let me just ask, because New Hampshire is more than a primary state. It's also a state where regular people live and raise families and work and retire. What's going on in New Hampshire? How's it doing? And then specifically, sort of your role on the town council. What are you working on?
Sure. So I think that New Hampshire is a really unique and wonderful place to live. I would recommend it to everybody. And we're certainly open for business. It's a small state. It's also an aging state. And so one of our biggest challenges is, how do we attract and retain young people? We have this, incredible brain drain where people, the UNH, the state college and university system is the country's most expensive public education system. And we are not doing ourselves any favors, because that often means, that's what happened to me. It was cheaper for me to go out of state to a state university of New York than to go in state to my own UNH. And so I chose to leave. I came back.
That seems crazy.
It's crazy. And And so we have this huge brain drain of people who, young people who are leaving the state who don't sort of see themselves, one, because they can't afford to be in state, and two, because, they're coming back. It's, housing prices are really expensive, especially in the places people want to live. And so, while we test really high, our schools are rated really well. We often are, I think we were the second most livable state in the nation, and we were consistently in those places. We're still having trouble attracting and keeping and retaining our young people. Some statistics that are really terrifying, and this sort of motivated me to run for office, was the average age of, for example, an electrician in New Hampshire is nearing retirement age, is in late 50s. Same with plumbers. Same with the sort of HVAC technical jobs that you cannot outsource. And in some counties in New Hampshire, the nearest electrician is 50 miles away. And how are you ever going to get that person to come fix your whatever you need fixed in your house? And so we need to really take a deep dive and focus on how to make sure those jobs are filled for the future, because those are jobs that aren't going anywhere. Those are jobs that are there and that are needed, and and it's a real crisis if you can't get a plumber to your house when you need one.
Wow. So what are you doing to try to address that issue?
Well, those are issues at the State House. But what I've chosen to do is really work to reframe the conversation about college readiness and what a successful career path looks like. And so, that means working with our adult ed education system school in New Hampshire, and in particular in Exeter, because they have really strong programs. It's, strengthening community colleges and sort of destigmatizing this thought process that in order to be successful, you have to go to college. It's just not true. And we need to, these are good quality, excellent jobs, and we need to figure out how to keep them. And so, the other thing is, like, a lot of these places are self-employed, and so how do you, how do you figure out how to make it an easy enough process to figure all of that stuff out? Because if you're, somebody who's good with working with your hands, and that's the way you want to go, you're probably not wanting to spend a ton of time researching which health insurance program to buy in the exchange. So, like, how do we figure out these sort of processes to be helpful? And
just out of curiosity, with your state getting older and some brain drain, one answer to that is immigration. Are you seeing immigration in, and how is that impacting the communities?
We really are. There is, especially, sort of in this 93 corridor, which is Nashua, Manchester, and then up to Concord a little bit, there are big populations of both refugees and new Americans. And where, we need to look and reframe how we look at and welcome people into our community, and make sure that we are, having teachers who can talk to them, and having, positive messages going home to them about schools and how do we, enroll people. But that certainly is happening. The other thing that we need to really think about in New Hampshire is what our housing and zoning looks like, because oftentimes there's been this really big push to have age exclusionary housing and zoning, so that you have, houses for older folks, right? Because it's the most effective way to encourage builders to build. And so we've really done that in a lot of towns. And so all of these planning boards, you talk about single family homes or multifamily homes, and they flip out and say, well, what is that going to do to our school enrollment numbers? We're going to be paying so many taxes. And we need to really reverse a lot of the work that we've done in the age exclusionary zoning and planning processes in New Hampshire. So there's a lot of this sort of really drilled down, not sexy issue discussion that needs to take place.
And that is so interesting. I mean, because, in California, it's all about well, we have all these people and all they want to do is build single family homes and we got to look at multifamily and dense living and this and that. The idea that single family homes would be a step too far is really,
I know.
That's mind blowing.
Yeah. And we need, the other thing, so this is probably getting way too deep and you can edit it if you want, but the amount of tax breaks that we give seniors is really high. And so, in Exeter specifically, we're missing out on hundreds of thousands of dollars of tax breaks on, and I'm not saying we should repeal tax breaks on elderly folks. There are certainly reasons to be very, very critical and thoughtful about if we're doing this. But like if you're buying a second home in Exeter, which happens a lot, it's a delightful place to live, you probably shouldn't get a tax break for being elderly.
Yeah. So let's talk about, we've talked about statewide, and just so the listeners know, right, you have an extensive career where you worked for now Senator Maggie Hassan.
Yeah.
You worked for Planned Parenthood. Now you work for Emily's List. So you've worked in sort of national level politics from New Hampshire for a while. What made you decide to run for your local board? What was that like?
Sure.
How's it been?
So actually, I have never worked in national politics. So my first job out of college in 2004, so you can do the math and figure out exactly how old I am. Then state Senate candidate Maggie Hassan hired me to run her first campaign. Not that she ran, but that she won. So that was in 2004. It was one of the bright spots. I mean, it truly made waking up the next morning okay. I guess we hadn't officially called the presidential election. And it was through that lens that I really saw how, and then, once she was elected, and then I went to work for the New Hampshire State Senate. So I saw, just how important these local positions are in changing people's lives. And one of the reasons she ran was there was this horrible discriminatory insurance policy that New Hampshire had enacted. I remember the bill number. It was Senate Bill 110. And what it did was it allowed insurance companies to cherry pick who they were insuring. So they could, send you away if you had pre-existing condition, all the things that we've excluded out of after the passage of the ACA. And so she ran in order to make insurance companies sort of take more people, and diversify the insurance pool. And I met people who were impacted, who had chronic illnesses, who couldn't, were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on healthcare, going bankrupt. And it was so illuminating to me of like, I had been, for years so focused on national politics because, that's what everybody talks about. And so that was really illuminating. And, I was at the state Senate when we passed, it wasn't marriage equality then, we passed civil unions. We were one of the first states to do that. And that was such a big deal. And we passed, in New Hampshire, you used to not have to wear a seatbelt when you drove.
Live free or die.
Live free or die. And so we passed that. We required people to wear motorcycle helmets when they've since repealed that. So anyway, there were some really effective ways of making people's lives better in my estimation. And so that's where my love of local politics was really born. And so I decided to run for my local select board when my good friend, owner of Water Street Bookstore in our town, which is an excellent independent bookstore, he had the seat for a couple of years, and he said, "You know what? I need a break. I think that I'm going to step down." And there was this young guy who decided to run and in his place, and he was doing really active campaigning, and he was knocking on everybody's doors. It didn't appear that he was using any lists, so he wasn't targeting voters. And so I thought, oh, that's so great. The local politics is where it's at. I'm so glad this young guy is running because, he would have brought the age of the select board down, a bunch of years. And then I think it was the chair of the Exeter Democrats sent me a link to his Twitter feed. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. I'll look through this. And there was all of this language about how how late term abortion language and how Planned Parenthood murdered babies and how Maggie Hassan, who is my political hero, was, personally murdering infants. And it was so offensive and so surprising. And I thought, over my dead body, is this guy going to be elected to the select board and represent me? And so I decided that I was going to run. And, I've been running campaigns. I've been working in campaigns for a decade. And it was a really interesting experience of actually being a candidate. I have, now that I work with candidates all the time, I feel like I have so much more empathy for the hard parts of campaigning, of, what it feels like to knock on somebody's door and ask for a vote for myself. It somehow felt very easy to do that for other people. And so, and I also had all of the things that, women candidates typically have around self-worth and self-doubt and, but I don't understand, this particular issue, or I don't really understand what these water notices that we're getting mean.
Even after all your experience and all your training. Yeah.
And I also, this is really ridiculous and I'll sound so silly, but I have an MPA, or an MPH. So, I have a master's degree in essentially how to run a town. And I was still thinking to myself, but there's this piece and I don't remember what a TIF district, exactly how the financing works and what is that going to do. And I remember talking to my partner and she just said, are you nuts? You have to do this. And so I decided to run. I raised a bunch of money. I mobilized like crazy. And I beat him by 10 points. So here we are. One of the first things that the select board did was it changed its name, because it used to, all over New England, especially New Hampshire, they're called Board of Selectmen. And there was a board made up of 4 women plus 1 man. and the chair, it wasn't me. I didn't think to do this. I should have thought to do this, but she made a motion to change the name because she said, this is ridiculous. But in our state law, it still talks about Board of Selectmen, which is not very inclusive. But so that's sort of my story, and it has been, the honor and privilege of my life to serve my town.
How different has it been than what you sort of anticipated coming in?
So it is very different. There are, the things that we get caught up in are often so minor, that they're like personality conflicts between the arts committee and the parade committee. And that sort of stuff makes me bonkers because, I really want to help make the town grow and improve and progress. And I don't like talking about, so-and-so is getting a better deal than me by, one more day of gallery space. And I just, so that has been challenging. But the other thing is just how a phone call or actually following up with somebody can sort of change their life. One example that I'll give, and sort of one of the most meaningful experiences of my life actually has been this woman that I met on the campaign trail. She actually reached out to me and said, I really want to meet you. So I went over to her house just for tea, and she has a daughter who is very developmentally disabled and is sort of walking. She's 5. She's sort of walking. She'll never talk. She'll never eat. And one of the things that my friend wants for her daughter is for there to be an adult-sized changing table in our town, somewhere where when they are out, because the little girl loves to be out and about. She's so social. She's delightful. But there wasn't a place to change her daughter, so that would sort of disrupt their entire day if they had to stop what they were doing and go home to change her diaper. And we just passed a large bond to renovate our library in downtown Exeter. And so one of the things that the mom wanted was for there to accommodate a changing table. And she said, I don't care what kind it is. It doesn't matter. If you need me to raise the money, I'll raise the money. It's not that expensive. And I'll do it. And there are grants. I've researched. Here's, some options. And the library shut her down. And so I went on a warpath because it seemed so simple to have an inclusive place, an inclusive town for everybody. And so, because of continuously showing up and advocating for her, they changed their minds. They put it in the construction plan. And now this little girl is going to be able to participate in downtown life in a more full way. And it's, things like that you just never sort of think about, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like, unless you are living this experience, I would have never thought, we need a adult changing table in one of our bathrooms. One of them. It doesn't need to be all of them. And so that was really transformative and interesting because, sometimes you think, if you just tell somebody, everybody will see it's a good idea. And that's not not my experience. Yeah.
That's a great story. I mean, it's like, you're right. It's small and it's not at all what you sort of run for office,
right.
But it just goes to the essence of what a community is and what local government's meant to be there, meant to exist for.
Yeah.
You bring a diverse background to elected office. Obviously, you're a woman and you worked for Emily's List. You're also LGBTQ. You're also a mom. Can you talk about how that all those experiences inform your work in elected life?
Yeah, I mean, I think I suffer from what a lot of women candidates feel. Like we talked about, thinking that I needed to be an expert in literally everything. And something that I heard a lot about when I was campaigning was, people who were progressive and who were my friends and who, really were backers in a lot of ways would say things to me like, who's going to have your kids? What are you going to do with your kids? And it was so insulting. It was like, well, oh my God, where are they? Have you seen them? And, and it's like, well, I, made childcare arrangements, or they're with their father, or they're with my partner, of course I've taken care of my children. I have 2 boys, 6 and 8, and they are sort of the loves of my life. They're both incredibly funny, but also it has given me such an appreciation for the work that people do in public schools because, one of the things that I try to do is I go and volunteer once a month in my younger son's classroom because he needs a little bit more help adjusting. He is a very spirited child. And it is the worst hour of my month. Like, it is just so stressful, and, trying to manage like an arts project with a bunch of 6-year-olds is literally the worst. But I also, it's one of the ways that I can contribute to my community, and it's really important, and it makes me value the work that teachers do so immensely. And I guess I went down a rabbit hole here, but I think that I balance things like everybody else does. There are some things that just take a back seat, and I never feel like I'm giving 100% to almost anything, or, sometimes I feel like, I'm doing such amazing work with my candidates. So at Emily's List, I'm the state and local regional director for the Northeast. So I cover the all of New England plus New York and New Jersey. And I have candidates from everything under governor. So lieutenant governor on down through, we endorsed in the Boston City Council, for example, which was really exciting. And still, that race is still not over. But so sometimes I feel like, I'm doing so well with these candidates, and then I'm like, oh my God, I need to, respond to a constituent email, and sometimes the boys, it's just like, oh my God, have they even looked at their spelling words this week? I hope they have. And so the other thing that I've really learned is it really does take a village, and it does take a community, and asking for help. In the same way that I tell candidates, and I have to tell myself, you ask for money to run your campaign because you need to be elected and to serve, and your voice is valued and worth it. And it's the same with asking for help for, watching your kids, or, sometimes it's like, I need you to go be at this meeting because I can't be there. And I need sort of a representative to make sure that I'm there and paying attention. So I think that's the other way that I do it. I also have an incredibly supportive partner who also takes on some of the work of our town. She's on the budget recommendations committee. So I feel like we have, the governing side and the budget side. So I've got that covered.
Do you ever disagree on,
oh my
on an
God,
issue?
all the time. And I am always right. Not typically. We typically are we are pretty in sync in terms of priorities for the town, but I would win.
Good. Fall in line.
That's right.
So what, first of all, let me just say, so I have a 8-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I decided to coach the 4-year-old soccer team.
Oh my God.
And it
Bless
was
you.
it was so hard. So yes, that empathy and sympathy for the teachers and other people it's eye-opening.
It is.
So do you, obviously you help candidates who run for higher office, although I always I think that's a misnomer because you serve where you are, and there's a lot about higher office that doesn't always appealing. But are you thinking about the future, or are you just trying to keep all the balls you have in the air? How do you think about all that?
I certainly think about the future in terms of what I want the representation from my state to look like. I don't necessarily know that I'm the right person. And I really, really love what I'm doing. There is the other thing to note about New Hampshire is the legislators are paid for $100 a year, which is not a living wage by anybody's definition. It's so crazy. So we have 424 legislators, 24 in the House, 400 in the Senate, and it is a volunteer job. And so, it's not possible to move into one of those roles, even if I thought about wanting to, because I need to, pay the bills. And I also, but I am definitely committed to making sure that we have the right representation, and, sort of continue this really strong tradition. Actually, one thing I will point out is New Hampshire has had the only 2 women who have both been governors and senators, and they're both serving currently. Shout out to Jean Shaheen and Maggie Hassan. And for a while, we had an all-female federal delegation. And now we have Chris Pappas, who's LGBTQ. He's part of the New Dems. He's wonderful and so happy he's there. So we really do have a strong federal delegation. We just need to make sure to hold the House and the Senate because of redistricting. It's going to be so crucial. And when we have fair districts, we have a much easier time winning. And so that's my priority for 2020.
Absolutely. It should be everyone's priority for 2020.
Amen.
You don't get health care or free college or anything if you don't have fair districts. It's
Yep.
not going to happen for a decade.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So pay attention. Molly, thank you for joining us. It's been really fun to talk to you both about New Hampshire and your sort of personal journey into this. And it sounds like you're doing really good work.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It has been an honor.
Thank you. Well, thank you for joining us on An Honorable Profession, and I look forward to hearing more about your service. Thanks for listening to An Honorable Profession. Please subscribe to hear more amazing leaders, and keep asking your elected officials to be honorable. Boots Road Group produces this podcast. I'm Ryan Coonerty, and because we keep this honorable, no tax dollars were used in the making of this podcast.